My name is Noah Schultz-Bayard, and I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships here at the Australia Institute. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to this, Australia's biggest book club webinar. And I also wanted to extend a particularly warm welcome to Professor George Williams, who's joining us today, and we're so thrilled to have on board for this important conversation.
Thanks, Noah.
Before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Kaurna people here in the Adelaide Plains, a beautiful part of South Australia, and pay my respects to elders past and present, but also to acknowledge that we're coming to this conversation from parts all over this country, and to pay our respects to elders past and present from Indigenous communities who have cared for this land for tens of thousands of years before now. So important to pay respects. Please feel free to mention in the chat where you're joining us from today, and pay respects in the chat as well. I just wanted to flag that you can register for all of our upcoming webinars at australiainstitute.org.au. You can go to the events page there and have a look at all of the fabulous conversations that we have coming up. Hopefully they'll be as good as today's conversation. I can't promise they all will be. We're going to have a great chat today, but all of the future opportunities and webinars are available on our website. So for today, we're going to have an hour for this webinar. It's going to be a fascinating conversation, critique and analysis of where we are at with the higher education sector in Australia. We want to hear from you. So the first half of the conversation will be, I'll be asking some questions, but the second half of the webinar, we want to hear what questions you would like to have answered. So on that, there is a Q&A button on the bottom of the screen that you can open up at any time and add questions that you would like to have answered. Also, if you open up that Q&A box, you can see other people's questions, and if you would like to see one specifically answered, you can upvote that question. So we love to hear from people, so would really encourage you to get involved and submit your questions via the Q&A box. I also wanted to mention that it's important that we keep things civil and on topic in the chat function. I just want to say thank you for my colleagues who are moderating the chat, and they've been told to be ruthless with any out of line behavior, and that they will boot people out. I don't think it'll come to that today, but you never know. So yes, we appreciate people being kind-spirited and on topic in the chat. Finally, I just wanted to say that this is a live event and it is being recorded. The recording will be available on our website, australiainstitute.org.au, in the coming days. But moving us forward into the conversation, into the meat and potatoes of today's webinar, I wanted to introduce Professor George Williams. He's the Vice-Chancellor and President of Western Sydney University. He previously served as the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Dean of Law, and Anthony Mason Professor at the University of New South Wales. He is a leading constitutional lawyer, co-author with Professor Megan Davis of Everything You Need to Know About the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and author and editor of dozens more books. He has appeared as a barrister in the High Court and led major public inquiries. And we're here today to discuss George's new Vantage Point essay, Aiming Higher, Universities and Australia's Future. This is the third Vantage Point essay published by Australia Institute Press, and we're thrilled to have had the honour of both George's authorship of the essay and his presence with us for this conversation today. So thank you for being with us, George.
Pleasure, Noah, and I'd say I'm here on the land of the Barramatical people of the Darug Nation in Parramatta.
Fantastic, great. We're thrilled to have you here. And I guess just to get us started, George, I thought I'd ask, I mean, you're an experienced author. You've written for academic audiences extensively, but you've also written for general audiences and the public in various forms over the years. So I guess I wanted to ask, what were you seeking to achieve with this Vantage Point essay that we're discussing today?
Yeah, thanks, Noah. And it's a great series and a great opportunity. I want to get something off my chest. That was part of it. I also want to understand what was going on. So from my point of view, I felt we've been talking about higher education for a long time, but not enough about the position of students, their voice, what's happening to them. And what I've seen here at Western Sydney is a really dramatic impact on young people, in particular with poverty, all of the problems that we often see for young people magnified when they study. And I felt that's a perspective that needed to be elevated in the public debate. But I also want to understand, how did we get here? How, as a rich nation, are we in a position when Australian students, but also international students, can be in such dire need when they study? 1 in 2 of our students have got food insecurity. We run food pantries just to keep them fed. Why does it mean for so many students that actually poverty is the order of the day when you're trying to get ahead in higher education? So tracing the policy decisions, essentially, to work out how we got to this point, what were the wrong turnings, and why the essay? Well, I mean, I've written a lot of books, but this one was short. Had the big advantage, I felt, and I think there's a really good position for these bite-sized narratives under 20,000 words that you can really make an argument, explain how we got here. And I felt it was the right length to make the point that needed to be made. And to tell you the truth, I'm not sure many people would have wanted to read a 600-page tome on this, as opposed to something nice, short, direct, that answers the questions and make a point. I think it's a great concept for publishing these type of important ideas about national debates.
Agreed. It's an exciting new initiative for us at the Institute. Our tagline for the series is that it's big ideas in small packages. And
it's a very small book. It's the smallest I've written. Look, I've written one book that was over 1 million words. That was a textbook on constitutional law. And I'm very sorry if there are any students listening who are reading that book. It's big, dense, and difficult. This is the opposite, the shortest thing I've ever written for a book. And bring it on. And
Yeah,
also, I could do it in a short period of time. It could be really responsive to the issues of the day. So it didn't take 2 years to write. This I could really write over a condensed period, and it's really relevant for the things we're talking about now.
absolutely. You do tackle big ideas in this small package, absolutely. You mentioned there, and you opened the essay with a vivid description of student poverty and student food insecurity, basically a lot of the struggles that students are facing today, especially students from low socioeconomic backgrounds. What impact is that increasing hardship and the rising cost of living having on students and their access to higher education right now?
Let me say it's a two-track system. If you've got the bank and mum of dad, it's fine. And I have to say that my kids are fine. They're lucky. I can support them through uni. They can live at home. They can do work without excessive work, and so the system works brilliantly for people who have that sort of backing. But a lot of Australians don't. Many Australians come from backgrounds that don't have the same economic opportunity. Parents can't afford to keep them at home. And this is the Western Sydney student in large part, the students who really have to make their own way when they finish high school. Youth allowance is only $47 a day. The median rent's over $100 a day. So, there's your rent gone, double what you get in youth allowance. And, I talked to one student at one of our community dinners, and they were saying that it's so difficult, they couldn't even find someone to couch surf with youth allowance. So they were literally living in their car, paramedicine student, 3 years they expected to live in their car. And when you're in that sort of, really difficult economic circumstances, well, things have to start giving. For many students, they don't have enough money to afford the basics. So hunger is a real issue for us. Students coming to class either not having a meal or just really poor food. So yeah, as I said, 1 in 2 of our students have got food insecurity. And in running a uni, I mean, my job, my KPI, it's not a dollar bottom line, it's graduation. It's getting students to the end with a degree. And we know if we do that, they go into a great life. There's good jobs, big opportunities. But the biggest problem I have at Western Sydney Uni is just keeping our students in study, because when you're in that really difficult situation, the poverty for so many students, often one thing breaks you. It could be a health issue where you need medication over a period of a few weeks. It could be the food. And it's really difficult to sustain 3 or more years without something like that happening. So we intervene with our food pantries, free dinners, once a week on our campuses, the food pantries. You turn up, you can get free rice, oats, pasta, just basics, just to keep you fed. And, sad to say, running a uni these days is both being in the education and the food business, because without that, students just find it hard to meet. And I just find it, not just sad, but a bit shameful actually as a nation that we're not better supporting not just young people, but also mature age students to get an education and get ahead.
Absolutely. You talk about where the higher education sector in general is at in the essay, but also public attitudes towards higher education. Um, the Australian Institute conducted polling around the public attitudes to universities that you quote in the essay. What did that research tell you about how people are perceiving the sector and the way that it's currently servicing the communities that it's often the center of?
Yeah, and let me firstly say why where we are, and then I'll explain the
Mm,
attitudes, which, that poll showed clearly. We're here because of the policy decisions made about 40 years ago. There are more decisions since, some particularly poor ones, but 40 years ago, the Hawke government made a good decision that it wanted to open up access to higher education to more Australians. It was very limited, not many people, and really, even though it was free under Whitlam government, to be frank, not many poorer people could afford it anyway. It's too hard. So they
mm,
wanted to really open it up. But this was an era where, of course, you had privatisation, corporatisation, Commonwealth Bank, Telstra, you name it, a lot of government organisations. And when they looked at the uni sector, they wanted to increase the number of students, but they didn't want to pay for it. So essentially what they did was they set up a system where unis had to get funding from other sources. And if you look at the 80s, about 80% of all uni funding was from government. Now it's 40%. So it's halved as a percentage of our
mm,
government funding, but the number of students has tripled. So that's a remarkable stat. I mean, wildly successful from a treasury point of view. But of course, what it did is for universities to make up that enormous gap, not filled by taxpayers, you've got to turn to other income sources. And unis are always stretched, but they've had to turn to corporate sources. They've had to turn to international students, all sorts of other areas to make up the difference, to cross-subsidise our Australian students. So it's not surprising when you look at the polling, you ask, and the poll in the book says, from Australians, what are unis for? 80% said educating students. And that's, of course, exactly right. But when you ask those same people, what are universities prioritising? 54% say profit. So that money motive has absolutely come to the surface in ways that are really corrosive to, I think, public perceptions and support for universities. But it is a product of really those economic rationalism of the 80s. And I would say that you have to look quite deeply at the policy decisions and ask, well, how do we want our university structured? How do we want them to be institutions for public good? And you've got to have policy settings that support that.
mm. One policy setting that you single out in the essay is the job ready graduates package. And I think it's fair to say that it comes in for some pretty substantial critique in your essay. Could you please run us through what the job ready graduates policy was supposedly designed to achieve and and what impact it is actually having on education today?
Yeah, and I reckon the Australia Institute should run a poll. What are the 10 worst policy decisions of this century? And I would vote for job ready graduates as being one of those.
Wow, okay.
There are a few. I mean, I'd also say that the GST split for WA, that would be another one I'd put there. There's a few you could put on there. But what happened was that we had fee-free education from Whitlam, 1974 through to 89. The Hawke government, as I've indicated, want to increase access to education, but it had to be paid for. A good part of that was students paying themselves. So no cost went, students started paying. That was my era. I went to uni, paid $1,800 a year, irrespective of your course. And look, as much as people railed against it, I actually don't have a big problem with low appropriate fees. You do get a big income boost from a uni degree. But what happened after that is it just got out of control. And particularly in 2021 with job ready graduates, the Morrison government came in and basically introduced a policy that radically increased the fees for students again. And if you look at the stats, over that time, inflation's gone up 62% and fees for students have gone up 145%. So a massively high increase of student fees relative to inflation. But in particular, what job ready graduates did is the Morrison government said, we want to introduce economics into student choice. We want to influence what students study. And in particular, they didn't want students to do the arts, humanities and the like. And so what they did was they put humanities as the highest cost degree along with law and business. It's now over $50,000 for your 3-year humble arts degree, philosophy, history, you name it. Whereas for maths, it's $14,000. So that's, if you like, it's a pricing model. Pay 50 for philosophy, or if you don't want to do that, pay 14 for maths. And that was designed to shift student choice. But as a policy, it's failed dramatically. And one of the main reasons is they completely misunderstood student choice. If you're passionate about being a historian, the odds are not high you're going to swap to mathematics. It just doesn't happen. So less than 1 in 50 students will change their preference because of the price. But what it does do is a student who doesn't want to do philosophy just doesn't go to uni. We're pricing people out of university, and this is particularly impacting people from low SES backgrounds. And that's the arts degree is the degree of choice for low SES Indigenous women. It's the gateway into mobility in university. First in family, humanities is often the best choice, but you're essentially saying price you out. And so not surprisingly, we've seen a big drop in those groups going to university at all. The very people who should most benefit from a uni degree in the social mobility, this policy is pricing them out. So it's failed on the economics, it's failed on the equity and access. And I'd also add that, of course, it means the highest cost degree, arts, it actually also happens to be the degree that has the lowest graduate earnings. And it means that many of the people who stick the course over 3 years will never pay it off. So they have a lifetime of debt. It affects them when they have kids, when they get housing loans. So, the whole system is broken. The government's recognised it, but it just needs to be changed and quickly. It's so unfair, and it's having a really negative impact.
Mm. You say the whole system is broken, and you do go into detail in the essay about the different elements. So I guess, is it fair to say it's not as simple as just reversing one policy? It's not as simple as, reversing the job-ready graduates. There's a whole range of changes that need to come into play. Could you talk a little bit about what you discuss in terms of the way that universities have been incentivized to go about their business, the way that they've been rewarded and sort of encouraged to behave in a certain way, and how that might be counter to students' interests and
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And look, I would say there's a lot to do, but I wouldn't let, the perfect be the enemy of the good. Let's just get rid of job-ready graduates now. I'm fine. Let's start with that. We don't need to wait. And let's fix the $50,000 arts degrees and give students fair fees. And there is a budgetary cost, without a doubt. It's over $1 billion a year. But we've just spent $20 billion on HECS relief, which, by the way, mostly helps MBA students, law graduates and others. That's where the biggest benefits are. It's about prioritisation. Something the Australia Institute often speaks about. I'd say this nation should prioritise fair fees for students at $1 billion a year. We can afford it, and it's worth it. When it comes to other impacts, a lot of them are deeper and now built into the model of higher education going back to the 80s that was built in that era of economic rationalism that really set us on this path. But what that model does is it means that to run a university, you absolutely have to generate revenue. It doesn't come from government. As I said, 60% is now the non-government. So if you don't generate revenue, you can't survive as a uni, you can't teach your students. So the question is, where is that going to come from? And the number one source is international students. They pay 2, 3, even 4 times the amount of a domestic student. In my case, I would say 24 cents in every dollar that an international student pays to Western Sydney Uni supports our domestic students. It pays for our food programs. It basically pays for keeping our domestic poor students in at uni. So the government doesn't pay for all of that. So the whole thing is based upon cross-subsidisation. At the big unis, the GO8s, it pays for research in particular. But you can't run your programs for domestic students or research without that other income source. So what attracts international students? Well, rankings do. International rankings. It's why there's such a focus. Particularly the China market is really focused on rankings for choice for where they study. Well, what determines the rankings? Research determines the rankings. Teaching just doesn't get a look in much at all for these rankings. So the cycle is, for the unis that's been created, is do great research, get your rankings up, attract international students, that brings in money, that subsidises your research, which subsidises the rankings, bring in more international students, and you have a cycle, essentially. And that's what drives the budget model of many unis. And the significance of that is that there's no place in that for domestic Australian students. The funding for them keeps going down. It has to be cross-subsidised. And in fact, it's gone down even worse over recent years. So, and it's capped. So in that model, it's why you can have, say, one uni over 50% international students, others above 40. We're quite low at Western Sydney, just under 20. But without that model of rankings, research, and international students, you do not have a sustainable university able to deliver at the top level, given the government funding settings.
Mm. You lay out a pretty compelling description there of the problems that are being faced right now. Is there an appetite for change, for reform, and for improvement in the sector, or are you a bit of a lone voice in calling out some of these issues?
No, I think there's a big appetite. I think, I mean, many people have seen over a long period of time that there are basic structural problems with higher education. And of course, I don't want to neglect a lot of this is about choice of leadership. Of course, those things are true. There's always that. But it's also true that unis have been put in a particular frame and operate as such. And of course, governments, if nothing else, could just choose to make these more taxpayer funded, take the pressure off in ways that would remove the ability for unis to need to do some of these other things. It's a mix of these things. I mean, I actually think the solutions are there. And if you look particularly at the government's accord, I think it's the right bundle of changes. It's a blueprint for 2050. It's a getting equity and access for students. A lot of really positive things. It says get rid of the JRG. All of these things are there, but we just got to get it done. And I'm concerned we're taking too long to do some of these things, but I support that blueprint. And I'd say, again, it's about prioritisation. And in my case, I just think young people get a raw deal, and this is a really clear example of it. And I would say that, you know, given the debt we're loading people up with, the fees, problems with housing, climate change or the like, well, this is an area. Education is the great enabler for people. It's something we should invest more in, not to give unis more money, but to give students more fees, fair fees, and also just to make sure the system prioritises their interests.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I did want to just remind people about our handy Q&A box. We'll go to questions from the audience in a little moment, but I would really appreciate. I see that there's lots of comment in the chat, but if people could also jump across to the Q&A section and put some questions in there, that would be appreciated. I see there's a couple already. Thank you. But even though it's a small text, the Vantage Point essay, you cover a lot of different areas in there. We won't be able to solve the issues facing the sector in our conversation today, or even go through all of the points that you make in the essay. But you also, while it's about higher education, you also talk about schooling in the text. What do you see as some of the challenges that Australia needs to overcome in supporting younger students, even before they get to the age of engaging with higher education?
Yeah, look, I talk a bit about this in the little book because it's a system, of course. And in fact, many of the problems that we're struggling with in higher education are actually the product of problems in primary and high school or even early learning. And they include the fact that we have many students who get through high school but still have basic problems, literacy and numeracy. And again, we invest in those programs, we support those students. The data is really clear from NAPLAN and others that if you take the lowest 25% by income in Australia, those students on average will be 5 years behind the rest of the community. So we could get someone at 18 who comes from a low SES background. On average, they'll have the reading and writing ability of a 13-year-old. And that's the truth of our education system. Again, the two-track that there are dramatically different outcomes from primary and high school for people from poorer backgrounds, regional, Indigenous and the like. And as much as I focus on higher education, in many ways, the most urgent thing is actually investment and support for students to get through those earlier years in school. And that's playing out in lots of different ways. One is just the attainment I've talked about. It also reflected in the fact that higher education numbers have been stagnant since 2012. So people going from school to higher education today about the same as it was in 2012, despite population increase. You can look at people completing high school, particularly government schools. Remarkably, over the last 7 or 8 years, the number of students completing public school, getting to year 12, has gone down 10%. So it used to be 83% completion in government schools, now it's 73%. That for me is one of the most worrying stats. Why is it now increasingly students aren't even finishing high school? Or if they do, they've got often problems with literacy and numeracy. So we have, again, that two-track system that embedded within our public schooling, dramatically different outcomes for private schools. And that just, again, demands urgent attention. If we really are a fair go country, believing in egalitarianism, a so-called contract where everyone, if you work hard, you get an education, you can get ahead, it's often not true. And we just have to be upfront about that. And that, for me, is a really urgent priority.
Yeah, absolutely. Another issue facing the sector, and some would say it's a challenge, some would say it's an opportunity, is the change and the influx of artificial intelligence. What do you see as the role of artificial intelligence in the near future, and how do you see it disrupting higher education?
And look, if I had all those answers, I reckon I'd be a trillionaire, probably. And of course, we don't know. And the short answer, of course, is that we're at the very beginnings of this transformation. And look, these are the early years of AI. What's it going to be like in 5 or 10 years, particularly if we get massive increases in computing power with things like quantum computers coming on board in the 2030s. So at my end, as much as anything else, it's not placing too many bets and actually being prepared for whatever comes. But I do believe we'll see fundamental changes in education. And the reason AI is a game changer is suddenly it's democratized content and knowledge in a way that's never happened before. I mean, the internet was a step, but in my case as a constitutional lawyer, I can get sophisticated, good constitutional law advice one prompt away. So the idea of universities and experts being the only repositories of that sort of high-level knowledge, that's gone. And particularly for students, it means that we've got to fundamentally rethink assessment, because the humble essay, it basically dead in its current form, to be honest, because students can get an essay with a distinction or high distinction. In many cases, again, one click away. I've tested this with ChatGPT, where I got it to set an essay for a second-year law class on Bills of Rights, did a great job, write the essay, did a great job. I said, well, why don't you mark your own essay with a marking rubric? Gave itself a high distinction. And so in less than 5 minutes, it generated all of the key bits of knowledge generation from assessment, generating an answer and marking, couldn't fault any stage. So we have to change with that and recognise what that means for our students and how we educate. And I would say here what it means is really emphasise things like human creativity, the things that we bring that these systems don't. And that's why, for me, things like the humble arts degree suddenly is even more important than it was. Critical thinking, human skills, that's the ticket with AI knowledge for great jobs and opportunities, I think, Noah. And, the downgrading of the arts degree is just wrong-headed.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go to questions from the audience in just a minute or two, but before wrapping this section, I wanted to point out that Western University hosts the Gough Whitlam Centre, and you were part of events marking the 50th anniversary of the dismissal recently. I wanted to ask, what legacies are there from the Whitlam era in higher education today, and how has it been reshaped over the decades in broad strokes?
And I think the short answer is there are fewer legacies than there ought to be. I mean, the big shift, of course, from Gough was fee-free university education in 1974. But the Hawke Labor government did away with that in 89 for the reasons I've talked about, to fund expansion, but not at the taxpayer's expense. So, I mean, that was the big, and of course, that was the big thing. People often talk about that, but it's now unattainable without a vast increase of government funding. You could do much better just with lowering the fees and evening things out. I'd certainly support that. But for me in higher education, I think, that was a moment, a light on the hill, if you like, that's never been repeated since. And since then, Liberal or Labor, they're focused much more on, economic rationalism, corporatisation, and that's essentially been government policies in order to reduce the amount the public purse has to support for higher education.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll go to questions from the audience now, and I can see that the Q&A box is absolutely filling up with some great contributions. So I appreciate that from our active, engaged audience. I might start with a question from Jamila, and they've asked, how can universities improve their reputation to the broader community? For example, Deakin Uni Chancellor did a report on the issues with the university sector. Bill Shorten set up a Centre for Excellence at UC. Do you see other methods for this public relations strategy to improve the university's reputation?
Yeah, and I really like what Bill's doing at University of Canberra. I think it's really good, opening up access to tradies, all sorts of people. Ian Martin, that report's really good on social license as well, I think. And I think what's significant about both of them, and I agree strongly with this, is this isn't just a public relations exercise. There are issues of substance that have to be addressed. And I think that's where sometimes as a sector, we don't get it enough, that we might think, it's about our message. It's about how we craft, how we engage. But I think the community's spot on. There are deep-seated problems here. Like I'm talking about issues of poverty in students. And no PR is going to fix that. So I think at our end, it's a matter of, with some humility, acknowledging there are legitimate issues here. This misalignment in government policies, there's decisions we've made as universities as well that rightly, I think, can be questioned. I think acknowledging that. And for me, also after acknowledging that, it's about, making clear what we're here for. And in my case, it's for students and community. That's our mission. It's not for the dollars. It's to deliver for those things. And through our actions, making it really clear that's what we're prioritising, that those things come first, and then arguing for government policies and the like. And the other thing I'd say, Noah, is I think you're defined rightly by who you fight for and what you fight for. And I think we've got to fight for students. And I think, again, even if there's not a single dollar in it for us, because if they change the fees, that's not a big increase. Nothing for unis, it's just changing student fees. But I'd say that we've got to be seen and out there fighting strongly for the people we serve, which are our students and local communities. And I think people look at us as a bit too self-serving. So, let's change that.
Yeah. So there's obviously a key role for higher education institutions to play in that transformation, but also government has a key role to play as well. There's a couple of questions along those lines in the question chat, which I might combine. So Christine asks, how can we increase government priority towards higher education? Judith wonders, why can't governments just pay more for tertiary education? And then there's a bit of a conversation around tax and revenue there. So there's multiple people in the chat who want to know what government's role is and how can they be encouraged to step into this space and fund it more fulsomely.
And I think partly it's the understanding bit. And we need to talk about what is the experience of students in the current system, and fees and funding are obviously a key part of that. But it doesn't have to be this way. It's often, to tell you the truth, not this way in other countries. We are quite different in terms of the low levels of government funding and the exposure of our universities to international competition. That was the policy choice in the era of opening our banks to international competition. Same for unis, happened in the 80s. And we've been wildly successful, by the way. We've got 6 unis in the top 100 in the rankings. The best per capita in the world. If there was an Olympics for universities and rankings, we would win it every single year, Australia. But that's a policy decision. And you can look at Scandinavia, you can look at other countries. It's a different system. But they prioritise things differently. There's a stronger public view that the state should support people through education, and then you pay it back in tax. Sometimes taxes are higher as a result as well. But that's the public conversation about what do we value in this country, and what do we see where our tax dollars should go. And I think that it's often a misalignment. I see many tax incentives and other things, particularly for people with already great wealth or property and other things. And if we reallocated that to support people through education, personally, I think that would be a good thing. But that's the political choice. And at the moment, that's not on the table in the form I'd like to see it.
Interesting. Christopher asks, would you agree that many essential jobs in society do not require a traditional degree and or can benefit from later extension courses that universities could provide?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I don't believe a uni degree is for everyone. I'm a big believer in choice. I often say to students, actually, I think probably TAFE is the right thing for you. If this is your career aspirations, then go for it. And my concern is people who actually want to go to uni can't go because of the fees. And that's an issue. But I do accept there's a real distortion there that can happen within the system. So it should be aligned with choice. But the other thing it has to be aligned with is just where are the jobs? And if you look at, say, the recent Jobs and Skills report and elsewhere, it's absolutely clear that as our economy shifts to new technologies, services, it's not as if we have a car industry anymore, that if you want these jobs, 9 out of 10 of all new jobs are going to require tertiary education. That's just the way the economy is going. And it'll accelerate over the coming years, given the nature of how our economy is shifting. So if you're someone who wants a job, let alone a high paid job, well, a uni degree is your ticket. And particularly with these AI and other things, that will only accelerate that. The day of a larger and growing number of lower skilled jobs, that's not where the economy is heading at the moment. So universities are aligned with where those big opportunities are. And my job actually is preparing them for the jobs we don't even know exist yet. That's the hard thing, because there's so many new jobs. What does AI mean in a variety of industries? How do I prepare someone who's a great thinker, open-minded, resilient, creative? That's what a great uni degree should do. So whatever the economy throws up, they're ready. They're ready to take it up, and hopefully a great new opportunity. But that's not narrow vocation, that's opening your mind. And that's what unis do at their best, I think. And it's actually what I'm suggesting is a move away from the more narrow vocational training unis have sort of been pushed towards, into arts, humanities, to win with STEM, or in ways that say, yeah, you're ready for whatever comes your way. But that's quite different to the model we've had for some time.
Indeed. We talked earlier about the hardships that a lot of students are facing. Samid asks, many international students are also struggling, and they're also increasingly demonized in xenophobic public discourse on economic and housing insecurity. Given the importance of international students to the sector and the community, how can we better support, and how can they be better supported in the interests and the welfare of international students?
Yeah, and thanks, Sumit. I'm really glad you've asked that as well, because I talk in the book, for example, Peter Dutton called international students the new boat people. An attempt to demonize in really inappropriate ways. And there's a few things here. One is, I'd ask, well, what sort of nation and economy do we want? If we want a nation based on education, well, international students are that economy. Personally, I'd prefer an economy based on educating the best and brightest around the world and digging a lot of things up. I think that's our future in many ways. And the thing with international education is it builds peace and security in the region. People who study with us go to be business, economic, political leaders. They have goodwill. If you want peace and security, educate, build understanding, build bridges between nations. I think that's a really powerful thing. And the idea of close your borders, it shouldn't have a place. And I think the economics of this are really powerful. The other thing that really disturbs me with the demonisation is that there's a sense these international students are rich. They come and take our housing. They come and take this or that. But I tell you what, I've yet to meet one international student at Western who's bought a $1.8 million house in Parramatta. Yeah. It just doesn't happen. And, our students are, typically coming from the Philippines to study nursing, quite poor backgrounds themselves. They pool together the family savings in the hope of a better life. Some will stay in Australia because we choose to let them, because we've got such nursing and other shortages. Most will go back home. But I'd say the bottom line is they're contributors. They support a lot of jobs at my uni. They support a lot in the economy. And I'd also say a lot of them struggle when they're here too. We don't give them the same concessions for transport and the like other students get. And I tell you what, a large number of the students I talk to at our food pantry are international students who are struggling with food and hunger in the same way our domestic students are. So I feel really privileged, actually, they choose to study with us at Western. I feel actually quite angry that as a nation we don't fully value the big contribution they bring here.
Indeed. Sandra asks, are Australian universities simply too big in terms of student numbers? US universities, for example, are not as large. Do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, it's absolutely true empirically, Sandra. I mean, you look at some of the unis getting up to 80, even 90,000 students. I mean, Western, we've got 50,000 students, which is large, but gee, they're a number quite bigger than us. Whereas you can look at the US unis, including some of the really elite ones, might be 15, 20,000, very different in scale. And the reason, of course, we've gone to such heights is because of the economic model. That, again, to fund your domestic students, your research, you've got to bring international students in. That increases the numbers. Government funding keeps going down. You've got to get scale. Big scale is what it's about. Then you've got economies of scale that enable you to more efficiently run this really large organisation. And the more the unis have been under pressure, the larger they've got in order to defray the loss of government funding. And as I said, in my case, just to pay our food programs and other things for our domestic students. So, I mean, there's only one ticket in town for unis, and that's growth. If you just want to break even, And remember, the funding for domestic students goes down every year in real terms. So every year you've got to grow or you go backwards. That's the model. And unis, they can't keep up with inflation without growth. So you'd have to change the model significantly in order to actually avoid the size. I mean, I'd also say, I don't mind size by itself. You can be big and be good. I don't think, and so that's what's driving it. But I think it's just whatever size you are, it's got to be the focus on students, giving them a great education. I think you can do that at scale. I actually think there's lots of good examples at scale. So there's no good or bad with size. The problem with size, though, is if you're big and not delivering a good education or your students are unhappy. The real challenge is how do you deliver it at scale at real quality? It can be done, but it does get more challenging the bigger you get.
Mm-hmm. Liz has written, your focus on students is important, but their support and learning is provided by professional and academic staff who are commonly overloaded and burnt out. What are your thoughts on what needs to be done to improve staff working conditions?
Yeah, and there's a lot of things. It's, again, a really good question. And I acknowledge where that's coming from. I've seen it. Look, I've worked in the uni sector myself. I'm more recently to management, if you like. My previous time was just teaching and researching for a couple of decades. And I saw this happen progressively. The pressures have got higher on people, expected to do more. Often central systems come in as well that sort of make your life even harder, as opposed to actually simplifying things. And also what we've seen, of course, one of the biggest problems is just insecure work within the sector. Really the crisis of casualisation, where we've got about 60% of all university teaching done by people on insecure work. And I know I was a casual once myself, and I know, absolutely speaking to those people, the impact it has on the ability to have a good life, to plan, to move forward. The insecurity semester to semester is so corrosive. So that's the biggest problem in some ways, but there are many more. At our uni, what we've done, which I'm really proud of, is we've got a decasualisation program. We've actually converted 160 people on insecure work into ongoing jobs. And in speaking to them, it's really very moving in terms of just saying, they can talk about, can I have a family now? Or what they've said to me is, finally, I can now plan for my students for a couple of years, as opposed to thinking I may never teach this subject again. So how do I develop a curriculum over a longer period of time? So there are lots of these things. I absolutely see it. And as to how we do it, at my end, I really see my job as caring for our people and our students. So decasualisation matters a lot, but it is really hard. We've lost jobs this year as well, which I feel really terrible. It's only been voluntary redundancies, not forced. But every single person who's had to leave, it's been really difficult, but it's been driven by the finances, and particularly the cap on international students. And I've talked about what drives the sector. If you bring that to a screaming halt and put a cap, then suddenly the money's not there, and those students pay for Australian jobs. It's why probably across the sector 3,000 to 4,000 jobs are going this year because of that and other policies. So I don't have easy answers, except I do acknowledge it. In particular, I'm keen to, secure work matters wherever you work, and I think they have a big problem with the higher education sector.
Got a question here from Mark, which is looking at the impact on local, regional, domestic students relating to the supposed cost efficiency of online education replacing on-campus offerings. And Mark asks, how important is government funding for enabling the maintenance of on-campus education for students who are not suited to online study and need the on-campus experience?
Yeah, and the government funding is critical because it drives university behaviour and what unis do and can afford to do. And of course, unis like mine can cross-subsidise things. Like we've just set up a performing arts program, for example, cross-subsidise that, but we think, our commitment to the arts and humanities needs it. But there's a limit to what you can do within your available budgets. And so, yes, government's properly supporting on-campus experience is vital, but there's not enough at the moment. And it's not just that. The other challenge is that students really want flexibility. That's a big driver post-pandemic. I'd have to say sometimes in ways I wonder whether it's good for them because they sort of value flexibility, but they miss out on the socialising, the networks. And I tell you what, you may have a really flexible, easy degree sitting in your bedroom on Zoom, but is that really going to set you up for life, particularly as an undergrad? And my answer would often be no. I actually think it's really important, the on-campus experience, particularly people from low SES backgrounds, networking, socialisation, the friends you make at uni are often the friends for your life. And I tell you what, one of the biggest epidemics we have upon campus at the moment is just loneliness from cohorts who, I mean, literally for our welcome weeks, have people who connect people. You have a friend, connect people, because our students are saying with devices and stuff, they're lacking skills, they're not on campus enough. Uni campuses sometimes resemble fly-in, fly-out mining towns because of the absence of students. And there's the hollowing out of campus life that I'm really disturbed by it, because I think, the teaching classroom is critical, but I tell you what, a lot of the best bits of uni happen outside that. And a lot of students are missing out, whether it's through online, which I think has a really good place for the right cohorts, but for undergrads, I actually think they benefit enormously from that uni experience.
You also make the point in the essay that the hollowing out of the on-campus experience is also partly attributable to the fact that people are having to work significant hours, often full-time hours, whilst engaging in full-time study, which leaves them no energy, no time to engage in the on-campus experience. So there's multiple pressures on people.
Well, and this is how people deal with poverty, is excessive work. And of course, that is a solution. But we've seen a doubling of the number of students who study full-time and work full-time simultaneously. Should only do one of those, but we have a doubling of doing both. And unsurprisingly, they're often the ones who don't make it to the end of their degree because they burn out. But yeah, your choice is maybe live in your car, don't work full-time, or work full-time, but then it's really hard to study. It's this impossible set of choices for young people who don't have family backing. But yeah, it's very hard to find students who don't work, and very easy to find students who work excessive hours.
Indeed. Des has asked a couple of questions here. Why does research have to be subsidized by student fees? But also, why does the government bail out incompetent banks, but not universities? So I guess there's a question there about the government's broad stance towards the sector and whether it is being supportive enough when it's willing to support other sectors.
Yeah, I think during the pandemic, this was really dramatic when you had JobKeeper and unis got left out. Pretty much every other industry, without even many questions asked, you'd have to say, even to the extent of being used for bonuses and things, were being massively supported, and unis just got left out. And hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs were lost during the pandemic as unis just, because international students disappeared, suddenly the massive crunch came. But yeah, the government didn't support us at that point. So there's a clear prioritisation again. You bail out the banks, but not the unis, even at a time of crisis when you've made them dependent on international student revenue. And there is, the government does have funding for research and things like that, but the truth of it is that's critical, but actually it costs more to support those grants and research actually than the money you get. Because if you think someone gets $100,000 in for a research grant, the uni's still got to buy the equipment, it's got to have a lab, all of those things. So for every research dollar you get, it can be about $1.20 the uni has to invest to support the grant. So grants actually don't provide income to cross-subsidise. They actually cost you more, and international students have to pay for that cross-subsidisation. So that's the second bit of your question about, yes, grants and how that fits into the system.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question here from Zoe, and I've seen the sentiment in the chat as well. Zoe asks for some clear steps from this discussion to take away on how we can make a difference. How can we help the next generation of learners? And as I saw in the chat, how can we support the universities moving forward in the ways that you've outlined here? Is there something that people in the community can do?
There's a few things we can do. And let me just be really practical for a start, is support scholarships for students. And because that's a big thing for us at the moment. We do what we can through our food programs and the like, but it's like, Great Smith family programs for kids in high school and primary school. Same thing for uni. We're out there saying we want scholarships, and we'll just go straight to the student, and it's a life-changing thing. It keeps them through uni. But that's the reality, that if people with means can support people to get through uni in the absence of government funding, which isn't going to change in the short term, that makes a massive difference, the scholarships. Otherwise, I think at my end, it's talking and bringing these issues to the surface. I think students should be at the forefront of debate at universities, and that's where the debate should absolutely focus and start. That's what we're here for. And I think agitating for policy change, in particular, I'd be saying there's a lot to do, but let's just start with get rid of job-ready graduates. We're all in furious agreement it's broken. The government's acknowledged, Productivity Commission, Accord, doesn't have any defenders anymore. I just think we need a strong campaign to get rid of it as quickly as possible, and let's consign the $50,000 arts degree to the dustbin. And more broadly, I think it's that, partnering with the Australia Institute and others, and to say, what does it mean to have a strong education system for this country where everyone gets a fair go? That's a bigger, longer term conversation. The Accord is great for higher education, and that's about prioritisation. That, as a community, do we really support education or don't we? And do we support it for everyone, not just the wealthy?
I think that's right. And advocating for some of the changes that you've proposed, I think it would be useful if people are really passionate about it, then they could seek a meeting with their local MP or send them an email.
Tell it matters.
Yeah.
And hopefully the book will arm you. I mean, that's why I've written the book in part. It's accessible so
Yeah.
people can really understand how we got here, what we're facing. And if people care, then we all know that people who care in sufficient numbers with enough energy can make a difference in this world. And the Australia Institute's a great example of a body that does that. And I'd just like to see education at the forefront of public debate. That's what it should be. If you want to change the world, you start with education. If you want social mobility and cohesion in this country, you start with education. But I think we've lost sight of that over the last few decades.
You mentioned the Accord in your last answer. Rachel asks, what are your thoughts on the Accord targets of access to higher education for underrepresented communities, given the lack of government funding?
Oh, I think it's a good target. That 80% figure is good. And as somebody pointed out, tertiary means both uni and TAFE. It's post-high school education we're talking about. I mean, that's the right target because that's the target that aligns people with jobs and opportunities. And that's where the economy is heading. So we need an education system that gets the right skills, right opportunities. Otherwise, we risk a lower target, then the jobs aren't there, in essence. So it's the right target. But to get there, the only way to get there is equity students. I mean, people from rich backgrounds are already going to uni in sufficient numbers. So the real issue is how do we get people from regions out of Western Sydney, Melbourne, wherever it may be, who are missing out. And this is where the problem is. They are the very students who now are not finishing high school in increasing numbers. They're the very students who aren't going to uni because they don't want to pay $50,000 for an arts degree. And over the last 6 or 7 years, the number, so just of low SES students going to uni has dropped 15%. So it's going backwards in terms of that number. So how are we going to get to 80%? Fundamental changes are required to actually make university accessible. And part of that is saying you can study without being in poverty. You've got to make this accessible, and even things like youth allowance. Why can't we just pay students a reasonable amount so they don't have to work excessively, so they can get through uni?
Yeah, absolutely. We are rapidly running out of time, but you end the essay with a call for universities as a whole to aim higher, the title of the book, to do better. So I guess I'll just ask any final reflections, any key parts of how you think we can work together to aim higher can be expressed, or if there's anything else that you would like to raise before we unfortunately have to wrap up the conversation for today.
Oh, I think no, we've covered the key issues, but I'm really optimistic. I think we live in a country where people do value education. People do care about having a fair go for younger people. And, I do believe that if we actually bring these issues to the surface, and it's not just me, it's actually the stories of people being told, the students having their voice loudly in the debate, we've got to make room for that as well. I actually believe it'll cut through. So I'm optimistic we will reform JRG and those other things. The Accord is the right blueprint. I just want a sense of urgency. I don't want to wait a couple of years. That's a lot of students who miss out and are impacted. And so as we elevate and lift this, let's lift it in the priority of what this nation does. And I'll tell you what, it'll do a lot of good if we do that. And I think we'll put a lot of people onto a better life.
Oh, fantastic. I like to end on a hopeful note. I too am an optimist. I think that there's better days ahead of us always, and it's important for us to join together in these fights, these conversations, these arguments, and the effort for progress. So I do want to say thank you. Thank you so much for contributing the essay to Vantage Point in this series, but also thank you for being with us here today and for such a insightful and interesting conversation.
Oh, thanks. No, it's good. Good to chat and maintain the rage, this time over higher education. Let's see how we go.
Exactly. And thank you to everybody for coming along today and for all of your great questions. As always, I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of them, but there were some real thoughtful, interesting, and provocative questions in there. Just a quick reminder that George's Vantage Point essay, Aiming Higher, is available to purchase on our website now, australiainstitute.org.au. You can also subscribe to the Vantage Point essay series, which means that you will get all 4 essays each year delivered to your door each and every year as a subscriber. We also ask, don't forget to subscribe to the Australia Institute on YouTube. And also, please have a listen to our podcasts, Follow the Money, Dollars and Cents, and After America. But that really brings us to the end of the webinar today and the conversation. Thank you all so much again for tuning in. Look after each other, and we'll see you next time. Thanks all.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to keep up to date with all our latest research and work, sign up to our newsletter. Delivered every fortnight, it includes behind-the-scenes updates from Richard Dennis, an exclusive cartoon from Judy Horacek, details for our upcoming events and webinars, as well as explainers, graphs, and not to mention the latest cutting-edge research and analysis from the team here on the key issues that are facing Australia. Click the button on your screen to check it out.